I just wanted to know at what point did you think this story would make a good feature? What made you want to turn it into a feature film?
Yeah, very early on in that process. So yeah, Cheating Hitler Surviving the Holocaust was a doc for History Channel Canada. It played here in the UK on Sky History, I think. And it featured 3 child survivors of the Holocaust, and Max was one of them. And, I interviewed Max for about 4.5 hours, and I spent many days traveling with him in Israel. Then I went to Ukraine. He didn't want to come back to Ukraine. That was going to be too difficult for him, but I went there. And while we were in Israel filming for the doc, I sort of slightly jokingly said to Max, Max, your film is really, your story is really a movie. The documentary is kind of just the beginning. And he said, well, yes, Rebecca, let's do it. And I was sort of kidding at the time, but also not. I make a lot of docs, and this is the only time I've ever made a doc where I've thought this story has to be made into a drama. And my husband's the producer, and I said, I think I was, having dinner with him out in the garden in Toronto, and I said, Robert, someone really needs to make this into a movie. Someone needs to do this. And he said, Rebecca, you write it, and if you want, I'll produce it. And I mean, again, there it was like, I didn't really think it was going to happen, but I did, and here we are.
Amazing. And how did you find sort of moving from the unscripted, factual documentary directing into scripted fiction? Were there any compromises that you had to make along that way?
Yeah, I mean, I really loved the writing process. So first of all, I had this incredible memoir, Max's memoir. So he'd written it down, and it's published, The Boy in the Woods. You can get it, and I really suggest you do, because this is a tiny fraction of his amazing story. So I had the memoir, and I sat down to write it. I think another thing about this story that really interested me was the sort of the child in the woods is really the sort of beginning of every Grimm fairy tale. A kid who's been, they've been orphaned, their whole family's, been separated from them, and they are sent off into the woods to fight the forces of evil, right? And that's basically what Max was doing. And so I knew that there was something really interesting in that as I was writing it. And also he's a young artist, so how is he dealing with the trauma? What's his little mind doing to process everything that's happening around him? And this incredibly magical and sort of mythical environment he's in, the forest, which is a very mythical place in Eastern Europe. It's all the Yiddish folklore and the fairy tales. But at the same time, what was also kind of challenging, and as a doc maker, I was very aware of it, was keeping the truth of it. And I think it's particularly because this is a Holocaust story, I was as much as I love Pan's Labyrinth and all those magic realism films, Pan's Labyrinth's a wonderful film about the Spanish Civil War. But because this was a Holocaust story, I knew I had to be quite careful with going too far into the sort of magical world. And so I tried to, when I was writing it, I was trying to kind of, walk a fine line with really wanting to go into all the sort of folklore stuff. And that's where you see the trees speaking, Yiddish folklore is that the souls of the dead go into the trees. I see people nodding. And so I really wanted to include some of that stuff. But again, I'm a storyteller. Documentaries are really telling stories to an audience. And so that part wasn't as difficult. I mean, the big challenge for me was working with actors. Not because he's challenging, but because I'm used to making films with people who are not, non-professionals trying to present something on camera, regular people. And so on the one hand, it was a real treat to work with actors who are, they are professionally trained to perform on camera, which was a real gift to me, but also slightly intimidating because I was, I wanted to make sure I could get the story out of them in the same way that I might do with doc filmmaking. And Richard can speak more to that, I'm sure. But that was sort of the big focus for me, was something I hadn't done before, because this was my first drama.
Well, I mean, talking of actors, Jet Klein, who plays Maxwell, we can all agree, is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we talked earlier, he was only 12 years old when you were shooting. Obviously that must have been quite a hard job to find your Maxwell. So who... how did you go about finding Jet? How did you come across him? Was it a case of casting? How did you find Jet? And, tell us a bit about that process.
Yeah, so Jet is Canadian. This is a Canadian film. I live in Canada. And so we shot it in Canada too. Amazingly, the woods in Canada look like the woods of Ukraine, which was a gift. So Jet is from the west of Canada, and we put out just a big casting call. Our casting agents put out a big call, and Jet was actually one of the last tapes I got, and this was still kind of just tail end of COVID. So we got lots of tapes in, and I saw a bunch of kids, and I, didn't quite work for me. And then I saw Jet's tape kind of came in last. It was literally the casting agent was like, this one just came in. I thought it was worth you having a look. And I kind of click on it. And he was so incredibly such a natural actor, so naturalistic the way he did it. And so, and I knew from that, and then I did a session with him online, and but I didn't want to cast him until I'd seen him in person, and particularly seen him in the woods. I wanted to see him amongst the trees, because I thought it's one thing to be able to do a scene beautifully, but to actually know how this kid has to be amongst the trees for this entire film. And so I went out to this gorgeous park in Vancouver and met him there. And immediately he was jumping up on the huge old trees and exploring. And on the one hand, a little kid who was playing, but on the other hand, this young, almost teenager, right? So he's also, because in the film he has to become, he loses his childhood. He goes from a kid to a little man. And so I wanted to make sure that this particular actor could do that, and he really did. And then he completely did all of my expectations when he played the role, for sure.
Yeah, no, he was absolutely incredible. I was actually quite surprised when you said he was only 12, because my last experience of watching him on screen was when he had become the sort of adult version of that character. Richard, let's talk a little bit about how you came to become involved in the project and how you approached portraying Yasko, your character, and were there any sort of challenges? How did you come to be involved?
I got sent a script. With the script was a breakdown of the character and a lot of information about Rebecca's documentary and the book, and I was very careful about which one I approached first, because I instinctively wanted to read the script first, but I actually read Max's biography first, because I just thought I'll hear it from his voice first, and then I'll read your script. And then of course I went on and started looking at the documentary. What really attracted me to this story was the fact that it was based on someone's real life experience, and so many times you're asked to be part of a drama, a dramatization of something, and I knew that this, first of all, didn't need dramatizing, but the chance to work with a young actor like Jet, you always learn something when you work with a young person, because they are they're free and available, and they do things that surprise you. And I just thought this would be an amazing experience to try and tell a story like this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and what I would like to get to know a little bit more about is your collaboration together. Like, what was it like on set? What were you, are you good at taking notes? Are you good at giving notes?
I only just found out that after making the film, Rebecca's gone and taken workshops on how to direct actors. And I was like, you of all the people I've ever worked with, you definitely do not need to work to learn anything. I mean, you were so instinctive, and I've said this to you that there was a very protective, mothering, nurturing aspect to the way you handled everything on the set. But I'm curious that you did go and learn how to direct actors, because you were fine. You were fine.
Oh, that's good to know. No, Richard was he was such a pleasure to work with, and so collaborative. And I mean, again, because I've never done this before, and I'm, as a documentary filmmaker, you really, you have to be so collaborative with your whole crew. I was quite shocked when I walked on set the first day and there were about 150 people there. And I was like, what's everyone here for? And Rob was like, my husband was like, well, they're here to make your film that you wrote, Rebecca. Right, okay. But no, it was just, I feel like this is what all films are like. It's just so easy to work with, Richard and Jet and the kids, and working with the kids is so fun, because you can sort of play with them a bit, right? And they're so open to, exploring. And I don't know, I feel like I'm, if I make another film and it's all going to be adult actors, I'm going to have, it's going to be harder. But nightmare. But yeah, it was great.
I guess there's a fearlessness, isn't there, with child actors?
Well, we were talking about this outside, is that, some very technically minded directors have a very strong vision of what they want the film to be. When you work with somebody that does come from documentary, they're looking for the unexpected and the surprises, and working with a young person, you're going to get things that you didn't plan for, and to be open to that and to capture it, you sort of have to be ready on every take. There's, sometimes camera take a while to get going, to get in focus, and you sometimes miss a moment that's coming out of, organically. So, but I think as a documentary maker, you're probably just ready to capture
whatever. You don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I can say about takes. I mean, obviously coming from the documentary field, like, what are you like with takes? Are you taking multiple takes? Are you doing it quite quickly? Are you like trying to get? I mean, Richard, you can sort of attest to whether that was a strenuous experience.
Right?
I think you were quite decisive. Actually, you knew when you'd got it, and you were really clear on like, I've got the scene now. And then there were other takes where it was like we could play and do other things.
Yeah. Yeah. And also we had, because working with kids, time is of the essence, because you have like basically half a day with the kid actor. So there was a little bit of that going on too. I mean, I would have loved to have more time to just kind of just follow you. Like I was like, remember that time I was just like, why don't we just chop some wood? It's not in the script. We just chop wood. And I would have loved to have done a bazillion more days of that. Just kind of, Yasko wandering on the farm, just finding moments. That would be my dream, is to be like a Terrence Malick, like have 5 months to shoot a film or whatever it is.
You were a little bit Terrence Malick with the morning.
Gosh, that is the best.
With the morning of the pig with the mist. That was one of those. It was extraordinary that when I walked on set, because the pig nearly got cut from the film, and I feel like I might have pressurized.
Yeah, no, it was great. You pressured me to keep it. And it was fantastic. I'm glad you did that.
But we walked on set, and it was just this really frosty morning with all this mist rising, and it looked like you'd spent $1 million on a kind of a special effect. But that was a beautiful moment.
Amazing. Well, my next question was actually going to be, how did you find working with a documentarian rather than, sort of a typical scripted director? I mean, we've spoken a bit before, Richard, about how documentary directors are slightly more hands-off and more observational as well. Did you find that in the direction? Did you find that Rebecca was perhaps a little bit more subtle in her approach and her notes?
It's more to do with I think it's a bit like surface tension on water. If it didn't need disturbing, you left it alone. If it needed tapping to create ripples, then that happened. But you were very sensitive to that calibration. Working with a documentary director, you just know that they're not looking for, as we said before, some kind of dramatization or lifting the script. It was only ever about the most truthful version of each scene. And I think when you come into that knowing, I mean, you're playing a real person in a real person's story who is still alive. There is no acting. You can't act your way through this. It's like you just have to live it and exist and feel it for what it truthfully is.
On that note, I'm sure everyone's dying to know, you've spoken to Maxwell about the film. How did it go down?
So Max was obviously, I made the documentary with Max, and he's become a very important figure in my life. I stay in touch with him very much. So he's an exec producer on the film. It's his story. He loves it. And that was really, and I showed him before we played any festivals or anything like that. I wanted him to be the first person to see it really in its entirety. And I was also quite worried about him seeing it, because it's, this is his very, very traumatic story. And to be seeing it, acted out. But he really loved it. And that was sort of everything to me. I was like, it doesn't matter if it doesn't play a single festival, doesn't get, just as long as Max loves it. And so he's actually been at some of the festivals we played. We played Toronto Film Festival. He was in Miami Jewish Film Festival. He's been to a few. And it's so amazing when he's in the audience and it's, a full theatre. And it's very emotional. Everyone in the theatre is very emotional when they know he's in there as well. Yeah. You met him on
I didn't meet him in person. We've yet to meet. I met him virtually on set in the middle of the woods on a computer screen. But yeah, one of the things I immediately got from him, that he's so engaged, he's so in the moment and with you, like not distracted by anything. And I after I'd read the book, I did sort of think, for all of our kind of whines and groans and our comfortable lives, what he did with his life after the film, the story finishes is phenomenal. I mean, he's 94 now? Yeah. Paints every day. He's probably brushed by every profession that exists. He's a really inspiring person.
And he loved Richard's portrayal of Yasko. So Yasko is this very important figure in Max's life. He never managed to contact him after the war, never saw him again, but really wanted to and still would love to. So I'm kind of hoping maybe this will play in Eastern Europe and someone might recognize the name and say, oh, that was my grandfather or something. So Jasko, I mean, he really attributes Jasko to saving his life, right? Because he was that sort of connection, that line of connection to survival. And he loves your portrayal of Jasko. Yeah. Well,
I was going to ask you a bit about the challenges of portraying a real life person. I mean, this sort of is a question to both of you, like directing a real life story and obviously portraying a real life story without having too much background about that person. Yeah,
I mean, I used Max's words as the source material. We worked with a dialect coach, which was, the technical side of it. I did a little bit of delving into the region. One of the interesting things to me is how the borders have shifted around. So we're in Poland and then we're in Ukraine. It's like the border has moved. And obviously with what's happening in the world right now, I did think, gosh, this is very potent as a story of these people that are being kind of booted off their land. One of the things that we talked about as well was, the traditional knock on the door from the Nazis. In this film, they are Polish police, and they are the Ukrainian police, and they're known to they know each other. So the tension and dilemma within the character is, all of my instincts are saying, help this boy, and then there's another side of myself which is survival, and my own family is at risk. And I just thought I can't think of a parallel in my own life. But should that happen to me, what would you do? And there is no answer. It's it's there in the film, isn't it? I mean, he takes him out into the woods, and the weight of guilt that he must have felt coming home after leaving this kid in the woods, thinking that I may never see him again. I just couldn't imagine what it was like to play that.
Yeah, and again for you, Rebecca, like the challenges of bringing this thing to life, we've touched on them a bit, but yeah, I mean also from a actual filmmaking point of getting a film made like this. Yeah,
getting a film made's really hard, guys. It turns out. I mean, I think again, the writing was a big concern to me. Was how do you tell this story honestly and truthfully and avoiding too much. I mean, I was really worried about if I made anything up, and I really didn't have to, first of all, because it's such an incredible story. It really is. And so I was worried about making stuff up, being accused of embellishing the truth, and you get into all sorts of awful Holocaust denial stuff if you're not careful. So that was sort of my big concern. And then obviously just casting Max was huge, and Jet did such an amazing job. And Max actually came to set, unfortunately, just before Richard came onto the production, or just onto set. And Max came, and it was actually during one of the scenes. It turned out, because of raining us out one day, he actually was there for the very emotional scene at the end there where the little Yannick dies, right? And Max, by the way, this 94-year-old man still lives with the guilt of Yannick dying every single day. It's huge for him. And we really address that in the documentary. And so Max came to set, and there was that beautiful, really emotional scene where Jet, who plays Max, gets very emotional over his little friend's body there. And Jet came out of the sort of bunker we'd created in the studio, and he came out and he was still quite emotional. It was quite hard for him to come out of the emotion, and his mum was there and I was there, and we were giving him hugs. And we said, do you want to go see Max? And Max was out in a sort of what we call video village with a bunch of monitors watching but not listening, because I didn't want him to have the two sensations. I think it would have been too much for him to be completely immersed. So he was watching and he didn't have the things on. Anyway, Jet goes running in and they just fall into each other's arms, weeping, the two of them. And Max said, you just became me. I just watched you become me. This old man and this young actor. And it was extraordinary. The whole crew, the whole set just went quiet. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. It was just a beautiful moment.
Wow, I'm getting quite emotional listening to that. Shall we open the floor to some
we've got a few more minutes left.
Yep. I'm sure there are people that have some hands already, so that's great. If you ask a question and we repeat it, it's just so for the audio we can hear, we can know what the question is. But
am I the first one? Oh, okay. Hello, Rebecca. Hello, Richard. Thank you, first of all, for that really powerful thought-provoking, moving film. That was fantastic. You should put a tissue warning on beforehand because that was the real tearjerker. But can I ask you, Richard, that's quite a departure from what we've seen you in just lately with, Red Eye and Fool Me Once and everything. Can we see more of those kind of things from you?
Yeah,
Please?
I'd love to. I just, I'm open to offers.
Thank you.
I was going to make the comment about the tissue as well. I had to get the hanky out at the end, so well done. And Jet, well, I mean, his acting was absolutely marvellous. Richard, as you know, we've asked you the odd question before. Your narration of the tattooist of Auschwitz was absolutely marvellous and very empathetic, and it's a very in a way, a similar theme. How difficult is it to change your mental preparation for these roles? Because I know you tend to build backstories and that type of thing, don't you?
Well, with this one, there was no need to do that because it was based on a real person. But actually, having read that book and having absorbed the criticism that book came under for glamorizing the Holocaust, it is a very well-trodden path. The Holocaust movie is a very well-trodden path, and it fluctuates between huge, epic, sweeping Schindler's Lists and The Boy in the Woods. And I think there's a place for both, but you just have to acknowledge the existence of both and not get caught up in that sort of emotive pull, because I don't think it needs it. I think it just needs truth and honesty.
Oh, congratulations. That's a really wonderful movie. I think part of its power is that I think some of your documentarian DNA sort of shows up because it's almost like the woods and the setting are kind of a protagonist in the story. And in some ways that really effectively counterpoints the horror and the drama that the human characters are going through. It kind of reminded me of Evil Does Not Exist in that way. I wondered if that was intentional in terms of when you were writing the movie or whether it was something that came out in the editing.
Yeah, it very much was something in the writing. I really did want the woods to be the forest to be a character. And, I was saying earlier, the setting of all Grimm's fairy tales and also just so many folkloric and mythical things in terms of Eastern Europe and also Yiddish culture. So I did definitely want that. And I was really kind of adamant about that in the edit. In fact, there was even more of that stuff. And at one point, the producers were like, Rebecca, get these shots. Like, too many shots of ferns and frogs and mushrooms. And I was like, I love all those shots. But so sometimes it might get in the way of storytelling. So I was encouraged to but I'm glad it's still in there because, yes, that was very important to me. Yeah.
Comment. It's comment.
I can help.
Yeah.
Well, first to say, as everybody else has said, what an extraordinary story and so beautifully told. I've just got a question, which is, many directors would have put the rabbit being caught in the snare in the film and everything that would go with that. And most documentary directors, I think, almost certainly would. And I just want to know, did you catch a rabbit, or did you decide never to, or did you do it and leave it out?
Peter would have taken you down.
Exactly. Yeah, it's we didn't catch a rabbit, and it was obviously a fake dead rabbit that we saw there at one point. The rabbit snare was an important element because it's in Max's memoir, so it's one of the pieces that I really picked out. And I really like how because Jasko did teach him how to set the snare, and that, of course, is one of the reasons he survived in the woods, because he could snare rabbits. And what I also really liked about the rabbit snare scene when Jasko's showing him is the sort of parallel to the fact that, in Eastern Europe, if you were caught hiding Jews or helping Jews in any way, it was hanging. Like, there was no jail, there was none of that stuff. So it was really, you were hung or hanged. And so, when Max says to Jasko, what happens? They catch it by the hind legs, and Jasko says, no, by the neck. He's meaning a lot more in that sentence, and there's a lot more going on in Richard's face when he tells Max that. So that was kind of an important scene. It's funny because you always have to end up cutting scenes, and I had to cut some lovely stuff. Not tons, actually, but a lovely scene with a young girl that I'd completely cut out of the film, unfortunately. And that was one of the scenes that someone suggested I cut, and I was so adamant that we don't cut the rabbit snare scene because it's so...
It's also quite early on in Jasko's story, but somewhere in his subconscious, he knows that he's going to have to send him off, and he's equipping him with skills to survive way before he actually, sends him out into the wilderness. So.
Any more questions before we round up? Someone at the front here.
Hello, hi. Rebecca, so this is your first feature film. You've done workshops to work with actors. So does that mean you want to move permanently into that area, or you want to sort of have a foot in both camps for documentaries, or what would you like to do?
Yeah, I'd like to keep a foot in both camps. I've actually got 2 feature-length documentaries in development right now in Canada. So I sort of feel like documentaries are always going to kind of be my main thing. And it's just, I never really thought I'd make a movie. I never intended to, but this story took me by the throat, and I couldn't let go of it, or it wouldn't let go of me, or something like that. So I'm sure it might happen again. I would like to make another dramatic film. I really enjoyed the process. It's not, it didn't feel that hugely different. It was in so many ways, like the number of crew and, working with actors, but actually it's storytelling, right? And you're basically taking a story to an audience and handing it to them and saying, So I think it is, I'd like to do both, is the short answer.
Book is... Yeah. Not like a question, but rather a comment. You have really brilliant visuals in this film, including costumes and everything else. You must probably had a brilliant DOP and production designer. Can you say a couple of words about it?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked. Thank you for the production designer. So he's actually Brazilian. He's Brazilian, lives in Canada. That was the big challenge, right? Because we shot in northern Ontario, about 4 hours north of Canada. So the woods was great. In fact, it was actually harder to find big, old-growth woods than I thought it was going to be, because we chopped down all the woods in northern Ontario to make our warships in the 19th century. So, there weren't actually as old-growth trees as I thought there would be. But in terms of some of the stuff, like having the costume, amazing. We had this amazing costume designer, and the production designer did such a great job of making it look like, Ukraine and the eastern part of Western Ukraine, eastern Poland. The village where Max goes and Max gets taken and then jumps out the window, where Shuna, my sister, is Regina. That was actually an old replica logging camp, because there's tons of logging that happened up there in the north of Ontario. So it's a replica logging camp. And then our production designer completely transformed it to be a sort of, Eastern European village. So I think he did an amazing job. And all the actors did an amazing job with accents. Richard and Shuna were the only Europeans on set. And we had these kids. The kids learned how to do. We had this amazing Yiddish dialect coach, and because I was really determined. There was a question early on as to do we just keep the North American accents. And I don't know if it's because I'm European, but I just couldn't see that. I couldn't see that working, And so I was quite determined that we had Ukrainian dialect coach, Polish, because Jasko's Polish, and we had the wonderful Yiddish dialect coach. So they all worked really hard, and I hope you're actually one of our first European audience. We had Manchester Film Fest and then you guys. So I hope we pulled off it looking like Europe. I see some nodding. Okay, good.
Your DOP was...
Yeah, Adam. Yeah, and Adam, the DP, was the director of photography, so the cinematographer. He's actually half Canadian, half Polish, so he was very tuned into, the look.
He was the one person that I was like, how's the accent? So I believe you. So
yeah. Oh my gosh, great, that's good to know.
Well, unless there's any other questions, I think we will end it there. Rebecca, Richard, thank you so much. Thank you for agreeing to do this short Q&A. Thank you all for being here, for coming out.
Thanks for coming
this evening.